This section looks at the distance and the midpoint formulas. So let's go ahead and start with the midpoint formula. The midpoint formula says that given a line segment with two endpoints, one being A, x1, y1, and the other one being B, x2, y2, the midpoint of that line segment, or the midpoint between those 2 points, can be found by the formula m is equal to x1 plus x2 all over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 all over 2. So big thing to note here is that the midpoint is a point. And since it's a point, it's going to be 2 numbers in a parentheses separated by a comma. All right, well now let's talk about the distance. What's the distance formula? Well, the distance between 2 points, so given any 2 points, we can find the distance between them. And again, we're just going to use the same 2 points. Let's say A is x1, y1, and B is x2, y2. Then we could use the distance formula to find the distance between those points, and the distance formula is the square root of x2 minus x1 quantity squared plus y2 minus y1 quantity squared. So the distance between 2 points is the square root of x2 minus x1 quantity squared plus y2 minus y1 quantity squared. Well, let's look at the first 3 examples. They asked us to determine the length. Well, if we're asked to determine the length, we know that we're looking for the distance and the midpoint, which means, well, midpoint is just midpoint, of the line segments with the given endpoints. So we need to find the distance and the midpoint for examples 1, 2, and 3. Let's start with the first example, example 1. So here are my 2 points. And I'm just going to go ahead and label them. This is the first point, so I'll just say x1, y1. And this one came second, so I'll call that x2, y2. All right, let's start with the midpoint. Well, the midpoint between these 2 points is the following. M is going to equal, well, again, it is x1 plus x2 all over 2. So 4 plus a negative 5 all over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 all over 2. So 6 plus a negative 6 all over 2. Right, if I clean this up, 4 plus negative 5 is negative 1 over 2, and 6 plus a negative 6 is 0 over 2, which is just 0. So the midpoint between these 2 points is negative 1/2, comma 0. Well, what about the distance? What about the distance between those 2 points? Well, the distance is found by the distance formula, which tells me it's the square root of x2 minus x1 quantity squared, so x2, negative 5, minus x1, which is 4, quantity squared, plus y2, negative 6, minus y1, 6, quantity squared. If I work this out, the distance is equal to the square root of negative 5 minus 4 is a negative 9 squared, plus negative 6 minus 6 is a negative 12 squared. If I continue on here, the distance is going to equal the square root of 81 plus 144. And 81 plus 144 is 225. And then can I either take the square root of 225 or can I simplify the radical? Well, actually, you can take the square root of 225. That's going to be 15. So the distance between those 2 points is 15 units. The midpoint is negative 1/2, comma 0. The distance is 15 units. All right, let's do the same thing for example 2. If you want to, go ahead and label these points x1, y1, other point x2, y2, and then start plugging it into our formula. So the midpoint would equal x1, which is 5, plus y1, which is 1, all over 2, comma, y1, which is 0, plus y2, which is 3, all over 2. So m is going to equal 5 plus 1 is 6, and 6 over 2 is just 3. And then 0 plus 3 is 3, and 3 over 2 just stays as 3/2. So the midpoint between those 2 points is 3, comma 3/2. And it's okay to write it 3, comma 1.5 as well. Right, what about the distance between those 2 points? Let's plug it into my distance formula. Well, the distance between those 2 points is going to be x2, which is 1, minus x1, which is 5, quantity squared, plus y2, which is 3, minus y1, which is 0, quantity squared. Well, 1 minus 5 is a negative 4, so the distance is equal to the square root of negative 4 squared plus 3 minus 0 is 3 squared. Continue on, the distance is going to equal negative 4 squared is 16 plus 3 squared is 9. So distance is equal to the square root of 25. Well, can I take the square root of 25 or can I simplify it? I can actually take the square root of 25. The square root of 25 is 5. So the distance between those 2 points is 5 units. So again, the midpoint between them is 3 comma 3 halves. The distance is 5 units. Example 3. Start off labeling x1, y1, x2, y2. Start by finding the midpoint again. So m is going to equal negative 3, which is x1, plus x2, which is 1, all over 2, comma, y1, which is negative 2, plus y2, which is 2, all over 2. All right, well, negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. If I divide negative 2 by 2, I end up with negative 1. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. 0 over 2 is just 0. So the midpoint between those 2 points is negative 1, 0. What about the distance? Well, the distance is going to equal the square root of x2, which is 1, minus x1, which is negative 3, quantity squared, plus y2, which is 2, minus y1, which is negative 2, quantity squared. Right, minus and negative is the same thing as plus, so 1 plus 3 would make 4 squared, plus, and 2 plus 2 would make 4 squared again. Well, 4 squared is 16, so you have the square root of 16 plus 16, and 16 plus 16 is the square root of 32. Well, can I take the square root of 32? Nope, that is not a perfect square. But can I simplify it? Yes. What two things multiply to 32, and one of them being the largest square root? Well, that would be the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. So the distance between those 2 points will actually be 4 square roots of 2, because the square root of 32 simplified is 4 square roots of 2. Right, in our next video, we're going to be talking about circles.